So great. Hello, everybody. My name is Siddiqui. I'll tell you a little bit about myself shortly. My talk today is about my personal journey of overcoming imposter syndrome. So the agenda today is to maybe talk a little bit about me, and then I'll go into my personal journey of overcoming imposter syndrome, and then we can maybe have a discussion if that is something that some of you want to do. So a little bit about me. So I have over 20 years of experience in M&A, venture capital. I started out as an entrepreneur. So my career has three phases. From 97 to 2006, I was a Java developer, software engineer, and a founder, and I started or attempted to start several SaaS companies before there was a term called SaaS. I learned later on what I was doing was really SaaS. And then from 2006 to 2016, I sort of decided to take my first job in a corporate environment, and I was in M&A and corporate development at a telecom operator in the UAE called Etisalat. So I did about $8 billion worth of M&A and corporate VC activity. I started out as an entry-level analyst. I didn't really know much about M&A, to be honest, or actually how to, keep down a job. But I did really well. I was lucky. 2006 to 2008, I was learning, and then in 2008, I was the youngest vice president in the company. 2010, 11, I was global head of M&A. And then after that, I sort of got bored of doing corporate M&A. And so I left and I joined 500 Startups. 500 Startups is, as you may know, a global Silicon Valley-based accelerator and family of funds. So I was part of the part of Fund 4, and then eventually I became a managing partner of the firm based in the Valley because of my ability to, I guess, raise capital and get into some interesting deals. So I can talk on and on about myself, but we're here to talk about imposter syndrome. So when I was thinking of what to talk about, I thought of talking about something that might actually be useful. What's interesting is that when I speak to people, so I'm not a very like confident person. I don't go out on stage and take over. I tend to be sort of a one-on-one person, and I interact with a lot of people in my industry, whether it's M&A or venture capital. I interact with a lot of people that I believe are very accomplished, and I found that they all tend to suffer from this imposter syndrome. So I thought, maybe perhaps this might be interesting to some of you. So before I started looking at, talking about my personal journey, I went to the dictionary and I pulled up, a couple of definitions. So one of the definitions I looked at was, what is the definition of confidence? Because I felt that, I lack confidence, right? So, and I feel like a lot of people lack confidence that suffer from imposter syndrome. And so, sorry, I'm just looking at. Yes, that's true. The best salespeople have deep-seated insecurity. Thank you, Joey. So he seems to like my topic. So in terms of confidence, the definition that I came up with was the feeling of self-assurance arising from, sorry, I'm just fiddling with my, arising from an appreciation of one's abilities or qualities. So yeah, clearly I felt that I did have this feeling of a lack of self-assurance or a lack of confidence. So that was, so that rang true. So I looked at imposter. What is the definition of imposter? So if you're thinking about imposter syndrome, so I understand syndrome, so imposter. So I looked at the definition of imposter, and the definition of the imposter is a person who pretends to be someone else in order to deceive others. So I really thought about that in myself. I was trying to see whether that was something, I was trying to figure out whether that was something that I was trying to do. And I don't believe that I had any intention to try to deceive anyone, or I was pretending. So that didn't really ring true. So I looked at, imposter syndrome, whether there were any definitions, and I did find this. So this was interesting. So this says, it's a psychological pattern in which an individual doubts their own abilities and accomplishments and have a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. That rings true. That was just a little bit setting the tone or setting the stage of what the topic that we're talking about. So let's talk about my journey. So it's been an eventful a few years, as you can see from my bio. I started out bootstrapping, knowing nothing about anything, and moved from the UK to the US in the late 90s. Was exposed to an amazing time, to experience .com boom and the crash, and experienced September 11th. Ended up back in the UK, eventually moved to Dubai, and had a stellar career in M&A. So it's been interesting. And then, obviously from there, then getting into venture capital, becoming a managing partner at a Silicon Valley-based firm, really competing with, if that's the term that you want to use, every environment is political. So, I guess indirectly or without wanting to, competed with several partners and became one of the top managers in this firm. But I still suffer from this imposter syndrome. I think the problem is that, from the outside, it's interesting, right? So on the outside, my success looks like that straight line that you see, what people thinks it looks like. It's like a rocket ship. But what it really looks like is this, squiggly thing where, there's a lot of ups and a lot of downs. Actually, there's a little more downs than ups. And I find that, you learn a lot, you develop a lot with your failure. So the more failures you have, the more challenges you face, the more you learn and then you develop. So that's kind of what it looks like. But from the outside, it looks fantastic, right? Most people would come to me and say, hey man, I'd give my left arm, you know what? I'd give my right arm to have the life or the career that you've had. And I look at them and it's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So with, when I was thinking of leaving Etisalat, and Etisalat, I'd been there for 10 years. I was the youngest global head of M&A at a top 10 telco in the world. 8 billion of M&A, 40 billion market cap. So like a big company. And of course, it comes with perks, right? So, you've got all of those corporate perks. And so people were telling me from the outside who'd left the corporate world, they said, don't leave Asher, and you won't make it on your own. There was a lot of advice that I received from people where they said that actually, a lot of the relationships that you think you have because of Etisalat and because of the position that you have. And I really did believe that. So I was worried and scared about leaving, but I was sick of my corporate life. So I wanted to leave, and I wanted to try something new, and I wanted to sort of get into venture. But I did okay. I found that I had an amazing network of people who actually I had reported to, or the people that I reported to, for example, some of the board members at Etisalat, or the chairman, or MDs at banks who had you know, from my perspective, I felt like they had no further need or use for me because I was no longer handling big budgets and hiring people and hiring advisors to run deals. But what was interesting was I really did okay. People were very helpful, very supportive. I needed help. I needed support on my own. And I found that people were willing to help and support me. So I started thinking about why that was, right? Part of me thought that perhaps it was because of the way I was when I had a position of power. When I was in a position of power, I wasn't, I guess, what you would call an asshole. Actually, to be honest, maybe some people do think that I'm an asshole, but I sometimes feel like I'm an asshole, but I don't think I was an asshole all the time to everybody. And I think that it's important how you deal with people. So that was a bit of a side comment. I thought about why they connected with me and maintained their relationships with me and wanted to help me. So I picked up the phone, you know, always self-doubt. So I picked up the phone and I talked to a bunch of people. I had coffee with a lot of friends and these supporters, and asked them, you know, what were the reasons why they wanted to maintain a relationship with me. And you know, I got a lot of bullshit answers, like, you know, integrity, which, yeah, I don't know. Intellectual curiosity, that was kind of interesting. But you know, what was most important was generally just being a nice person. So so, you know, not being an asshole was super helpful for me. And believing that, and this was interesting, and believing that, so my wife sends me these things because she thinks that I'm always, you know, I suffer from a lot of self-doubt. And sorry, I'm just, okay. Joe thinks I was being authentic. So, you know, this belief that my wife believes that I have, and the people I surveyed believed, is that, you know, you can always change your situation. You can't always change your situation, but you can certainly change your perspective. My boss at Etisalat, who was the CEO, when I was leaving, he was like, Asher, you've done an amazing job over these last 10 years of not getting infected. And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? I mean, obviously I didn't say that to him, or in that way, but I asked him, you know, what he meant. And he said, you know, this eternal optimism that you have, that corporates tend to beat out of you over time with their politics and cynicism. So, you know, never change that. So, yeah, anyway, enough about myself, and let's just get into sort of what I learned as I evolved through, you know, being on my own. So what was my approach to overcoming imposter syndrome? So one of them was to take control of and change my own narrative about, you know, where my life was going and how I articulated where I was going and what I was doing. And it was really about boosting my confidence, my self-confidence. And that obviously is, as most of you know, is not easy. But then I used to think, okay, so I need to boost my confidence, and I need to start taking risks, right? So yeah, so I started thinking about, you know, perhaps I need to boost my confidence and put myself out there. So one of the challenges that I have is, you know, a lack of confidence and a lack of, sorry, I'm just adding a few more people that are waiting. I apologize. I'm not very good at this. I apologize. So what's the worst that could happen by me putting myself out there, putting my narrative out there? And, you know, option A, worst thing that could happen if I, you know, talk about what I believe in or what my perspectives are, or put my, you know, my thought leadership, as people call it, out there, is then you find out you're a fraud. But, you know, that's not the worst thing to be, because, you know, that is an opportunity for you to, you know, realize that you don't know what you're talking about, and then you continue to learn and develop. And then I reflected on that and I thought, well, you know, that's kind of like one of the outcomes or takeaways that I had from my Etisalat days. So when I first started in 2006, I'd never had a job in a corporate environment in my life. I knew fuck all about telecoms. I knew bugger all about M&A or corporate finance. And yet I joined, and in 3 years I was, you know, head of investments for Asia, and 4 years I was global head. How the hell did that happen? Well, it happened because I talked a lot of shit. I asked a lot of questions, a lot of dumb questions, and I over prepared. And I guess I learned and developed a lot. And so the less I knew, or the more aware I was of my lack of knowledge, the more I prepared and developed and learned. So, you know, being a fraud isn't such a bad thing, to be honest. I think what's bad is to maintain or continue to be a fraud. And I think I've come across a lot of imposters who believe, or at least say that they suffer from imposter syndrome. And I actually believe that they are true imposters, because they haven't really developed or evolved or learned over the period that they've been. The other option is, if you're not a fraud, is that you actually know what you're doing and you know what you're talking about. And that's fantastic. So my preferred outcome is to know that I'm a fraud, because that tells me I don't know something and I learn and develop. My lesser preferred outcome is to know, to discover that I know what I'm talking about. Obviously it's good because it boosts it builds confidence, but obviously I don't learn. So that's at least my perspective on how I look at being a fraud or being a know-it-all. So what are my takeaways before we sort of move into like the discussion? So my takeaways from overcoming imposter syndrome, and hopefully this will help you, is number one, acceptance. First of all, it is what it is, and you are who you are, and you cannot change historically what you are. And the other is to take risk. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. If you don't take risks, you are not going to evolve. And as I've talked about, you know, taking risks isn't the worst thing, because, you know, if you discover you're a fraud, then, you know, you learn something. Unfortunately, I don't have a magical solution that solves imposter syndrome. What I've learned is that, you know, you have to do the work, you have to take the risks. But, you know, the journey certainly is more interesting than it used to be. And that's the end of my presentation part. And we have another 10 minutes. So in case somebody would like to sort of maybe engage in some discussion or Q&A, love to hear your experiences, your thoughts.
Actually, maybe I go first, because you mentioned on one side you said people perceived you as an asshole, but at the same time, like your boss said, you're a good person. So it's kind of contradictory. Maybe you give examples what define what you feel is a good person, you get a better feeling, and basically how you handle it.
Sorry, could you repeat that? You broke up there, and I apologize. I didn't get the whole question.
So basically, it was very interesting, very insightful, to be honest. The only thing is what I observed is that you mentioned that on one side you've been, from the outside, most likely perceived as an asshole, yeah. But at the same time, your boss, for example, said, you gave the example after 10 years, he said you've been a person you didn't change. So maybe you can give some examples what defined what, you know. It makes it quite miserable.
Okay, great. So, you know, so obviously I feel like I'm perceived as an asshole sometimes. Sometimes I feel like I'm an asshole. What do I mean by that, right? So I think there are some people who are true assholes, and sometimes you feel like you're an asshole because of what you do or how you react to people. So one of the things, and I think Vera knows me well, is that I'm somewhat straightforward in my communication style. And so what happens is that I'm very direct and open. And sometimes what that means is that I'm just trying to save you from a whole lot of bullshit and pain and confusion. So I just get straight to the point. When I understand what you want, you know, whether you're fundraising or whatever, I just tell you. Like now, unfortunately, some people think that, you know, I'm an asshole because, you know, there was no communication there. Maybe there was no dance or whatever. So I learned that from Vinod Khosla. So I met Vinod Khosla once, but I've interacted with Vinod Khosla over the years. So most people think that Vinod Khosla is an asshole. I actually think that Vinod is not an asshole. He is just an incredibly direct person. And I find that refreshing. So I guess that's kind of where I was going at with being an asshole. Sometimes I can be abrasive because I try to communicate to people. So I'll give you another example. So, you know, I was working with one of the royal family in Abu Dhabi, and you know, they're fantastic people. You know, the Arab culture is like very you know, welcoming, and you know, they'll never say no, and it's part of their culture. They don't want to say no because for them to say no to you is perceived as an insult. So they don't want to insult you. So, but the problem is that when you have some, you know, random white guy from the US sort of drop in and meet the sheikh, and the sheikh's gonna like, oh, I love you, man, you know, this is awesome. And then the guy will go away, and then the sheikh will turn to me and say, I never want to see that asshole again. He was exhausting. Now, of course, I'm gonna go to the guy and I'm gonna say, hey, dude, you know, I've done the analysis, you know, we're not interested. We're gonna pass, right? That guy thinks I'm an asshole. He thinks I'm a blocker because, you know, people don't necessarily like to hear sometimes, you know, information, news that they don't want to hear. You know, rejection is hard for people. I tend to think that, you know, giving you the bad news early is good because, you know, you sort of move on, you stop wasting your time on something that you think. So I appreciate that it's confusing and complicated to work in this part of the world. You know, you require a lot of patience, but I hope that I'm trying to be somebody that can help people, you know, navigate this environment. Anyway, I digress. And your other question was, so one was about being an asshole, and the other one?
The opposite, basically, because you're as a really good person after 10 years working there, which is basically a totally different environment.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, so people think that I'm a nice guy. So, you know, you have to go to the root. So I do a lot of self-reflection. I'm constantly thinking and rethinking or reassessing, you know, what I said to people, how I said it and stuff. And also I think about why I am the way I am. So one of the reasons why I believe I am the way I am is because, you know, my parents had, and so this is, again, like, this is my personal perspective, but, you know, my parents had 5 kids. I was 3 of 5. So I was like in the middle, right? And, you know, I ended up going to 12 different schools in you know, 6 different countries over 12 years. So I'm like fucked up. Anyway, but I think that one of the reasons why I'm the way I am is because I had a lot of turmoil in my life. Well, I mean, turmoil was a good thing because, you know, I've got a lot of diversity, a lot of different education styles, and I was an expat brat, right? But I was also 3 of 5. So I kind of got lost in the middle. I didn't get enough affection. So I feel that me not having received that, I mean, my parents are, by the way, not assholes. They're like good people. You know, I think it's just, you know, it is what it is. You know, I just got lost in the crowd. So, you know, I just didn't feel like, you know, some children or some people have a greater desire and greater need versus others. I was one of those that had a greater need and desire, and I didn't get that from my parents. So I think what it is that makes me somebody who wants to please others, because I think that, and this is, for me, it's interesting. A lot of people are surprised when I open up and share this, is that I believe I want to please others because I'm looking for that validation. I'm looking for that affection and that return. And what's interesting is that when I get it, then I feel like shit, now I need to do more because I want to kind of be a giver rather than a receiver. But I think it's just, so I'm not saying I'm a good person. I'm still an asshole, but you know, like, I think I'm a product of my upbringing, if that makes sense.
Makes sense.
So Joey had a question. Oh, okay, that's, we can do that offline. Okay, great. Any other questions, or any other, somebody else would like to share? We've got a few minutes left. And thank you, by the way, for that question and in the comments, Daniel.
Okay.
Maybe just on that side, I think it's, I don't know, I don't really have a question, but I think you have that many people have that, you know, I can, you know, now that I hear you talk about it, I can feel myself in this a couple of times, right? Especially in the corporate environment, when you want to, I mean, you try by being an asshole, that is, you know, if you're managing some things, then you need to look that it goes ahead, right? And saving time, or just teaching people that, hey, in my opinion, or even if it's just objectively wrong, then you need to tell them that, hey guys, this is not working this way. This is now, I would do it step 1, step 2, step 3. And yes, that is an uncomfortable conversation, and maybe you seem like not a nice guy in the beginning, but you know, your motivation behind is that, hey, maybe next day you will get it better, and then thereby I helped you. Yeah. So it's difficult to when to turn on, turn off, and when to do what, getting the timing right.
Yeah, I have to say, like, I've learned a lot about being patient. So one of the things that I learned, I was always in a hurry and always in a rush because, you know, there's so much to do. One of the things I learned is patience, right? So so you can imagine, like, 2006 to 2009, I was sort of an analyst. So I was basically the junior most person in the M&A team. And in 2009, most of the team, if not all the team, was reporting to me. And these people are people, some of them along the way, I used to report to. So this was a difficult transition for a lot of these guys. And they started to feel that, you know, I mean, maybe there was a lot of resentment as well. And they started to feel that perhaps I was, you know, maybe taking over and controlling things, and maybe killing their potential exposure to the top, because I was lucky to get exposed to the board. So one of the things that I did do is learn patience and sort of put myself in their shoes, you know, so develop some empathy, put myself in their shoes. And I realized, you know, they were fearful. So what I would do is I did like little things like, so that if the chairman or one of the board members would ping an email to me, ask me a question, I would then respond to them, because obviously I'm the head of M&A. So if I don't know what I'm doing, what the fuck am I doing here, right? So I would respond with the response, but then I would also loop in the person that was running that deal, and to say, hey, and if you want further information, detailed information, here's, you know, X, Y, and Z, who, you know, you can follow up with directly. So, you know, I don't need to be a gatekeeper. So step one, elation. People were super happy. They had their opportunity. Few weeks later, they're like, Asher, can you please fucking never do that again to me? Because I cannot deal with the heat. I think that was great, because they experienced and learned that there are certain people who have the ability to deal with, you know, and I'm not saying I'm special, but I somehow had the ability to deal with the board members and manage them. And I think that they realized that perhaps they weren't ready for that. Maybe they didn't have enough experience for it or whatever. So over time, they appreciated that I wasn't an asshole. Eventually, when I did leave, I went from being the most hated M&A head that they ever had to, they told me, the best boss they'd ever had. So that was kind of like a nice thing for me. So we got like 1 or 2 more minutes, and I think that hopefully the next person will take over. And thank you very much everyone for your time. If you thought this was interesting, please connect to me on LinkedIn or Facebook, and happy to take the conversation further.
Already did.
Thank you. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, Felix. Really enjoyed your talk, Felix. And thank you, Daniel. Am I supposed to stop the share and let somebody else?
The new person should take over. So when they come in, they usually take over.
Oh, okay, awesome.
The question is if we already arrived.
Ah, okay. And thank you, Vera, for joining. If you don't know Vera, she's awesome. You should connect with her. Somebody who also suffers from imposter syndrome, but I learned a lot from. And Vera's going to kill me later.
That's what I thought. It counts as a...
Oh yeah, and Oded Sharon said that he's doing a similar talk in room 3, so looking forward to attending that as well. My spontaneous thoughts on Bitcoin. That's an interesting off topic. I mean, to me, Bitcoin specifically, that's obviously, like, I'm not sure what I can say. I think distributed technologies in general are the future. I feel like we have the opportunity with distributed technologies to create the internet that was stolen from us by the corporates. In the 90s, I remember being a Java developer and hating Microsoft because we didn't want the internet to be, controlled by big corporates. We wanted it to be, this amazing experiment, which it is no longer, right? And so I believe that distributed technologies is going to create that internet, or that network, interconnected network that we started off with, that experiment with the internet. And so Bitcoin, I mean, that's an interesting use case, of course. I think it'll be a reserve currency for sure. It is. Will it be the only one? I doubt, but I think it's definitely an interesting. So I'm bullish and long on distributed technologies and Bitcoin. But I think that people get excited about it. People are very excited. Sorry, I apologize. It's Joey asked me a question, and I realized that maybe it's not to. It was to everybody. Okay. So yeah, I feel like this is off topic, but I think people are getting a little bit ahead of themselves. There's a lot of infrastructure layer that needs to be developed first before we get there. I'm not an expert at all in this space. I think the previous speaker was, but I'm super excited watching to see what the use cases are that come out of it that are So I guess what I'm talking about is the use cases. And when I say infrastructure, I don't mean Coinbase or the exchanges. I think exchanges are generally just like fucking horrible businesses, in my humble opinion. And the reason why I say that is because, when you look at currency exchanges, so currency exchanges, Forex trading, these are like really shitty businesses. They're like high volume, low margin businesses, and eventually they blow up because it's not interesting or exciting enough. So then you start to take positions as an exchange, and as soon as you start taking positions, fantastic, because obviously your margins go up. But then the downside is that once black swan event, or one time that the market moves against you, you're wiped out and you're bankrupt and you can't hold. So I hate with a passion currency exchanges. I love the fact that they exist. I love that other people invest in them, but yeah. to me, the infrastructure layer is the ones that it will enable use cases that we can actually do something with. So, whether it's, in the financial services space, solving real problems, not for the people who have the luxury to be able to trade currencies, like fuck them, including myself, right? I'm talking about people who need to transfer money from Saudi to Indonesia, and they're migrant workers, and they don't, want to be ripped off by Western unions of the world or the banks. And so I think that there's a lot of use cases there to solve real problems for real people. And I think when that happens, that'll be interesting. True. So to me, so I love the crypto space. I see a lot of imposters, yes. And I'll tell you where most of the imposters have gone. So now I feel that the imposters, you've actually seen a thinning of the field in the crypto space. So a lot of the imposters, you won't find them anymore in the crypto space, in my humble opinion, because I've seen like they're thinned out. But if you're looking for them, I'm happy to refer you to them. They're now in impact investing. So if you're looking for your former crypto imposters, they're all in impact today, and they'll be in something else later. I love some of these people. Some of them, I've tracked them for like 15 years, and they were in car sales or real estate brokers. And then they got into HR recruitment, and then they got into crypto, and now impact investing. I love the passion. I learned a lot from them. Oh, quantum computing. Yes, absolutely. I'm sure they'll get into that too. I don't know what the fuck they're doing there, but like, but I think one of the things that's interesting about, crypto and impact investing is like, people don't know enough about it, and it's not as, so, it's easy to sell. With quantum computing, I think that's still kind of like a technical thing. So, let's see. Mobile handset security, yes. I think private keys, absolutely. That's the type of thing I'm talking about. Yes. So you see, you're way smarter than I am because you intuitively understand what I'm talking about. Yeah. Handset security. There's a friend of mine at HTC who's they built. So HTC is working on this. A couple of others are working on this. I think this is going to be interesting. The chipsets. We need to build that infrastructure, and that infrastructure unfortunately starts with the chipsets and all of that, and new OS. Yes, exactly. Well, the first the hardware, then the OS, and then the software, right? So we kind of need to rebuild that infrastructure. Yeah, truly, just exactly. That's exactly it. You should look at the HTC. I forgot what it's called. HTC's got this project, and if you're interested in this space, talk to Phil Chen. He's with Raise Capital, and really, a cryptophone. Interesting space. Okay, Greta. I wonder where the next person is, because guys, if the next person doesn't come on, I'm gonna bore you to death. Like seriously, I can talk forever. It's funny because I lack confidence, but I talk so much. Like my wife is like, "Fuck, can you get to the point?" Like we have an amazing relationship, by the way, a very good relationship, but very open relationship as well. She calls out my bullshit, and I call out hers. It's good to have a good partner. Does anybody know what the next topic is?
Steward ownership models. I don't know who's talking about it, but it sounded like it was more around land ownership models and capitalism 2.0 type stuff.
Interesting topic. Well, maybe we can kick the topic off until the person joins, if there's any interest in somebody taking the lead.
Sure. I'd be happy to like throw a little bit in there. I presented earlier on regenerative real estate, and it's kind of like how do you shift land ownership models more to land stewardship models, so that your incentive is not to make the most amount of money and profit on the land, but how to improve the quality of it for kind of the next generation. And there's lots of civilizations that have done this for thousands of years, but we seem to have shifted quite quickly to another model. So for instance, one example of a project that I'm working on is they're called living legacy forests. And what they're doing is they're going into conservation areas, and when people pass away, instead of being put in a graveyard, they go to fertilize the forest. And this is actually a way to finance the long-term growth of old growth forests. And with each site they go into, they set it up as more of a land trust. So there's no one that really owns the land anymore. It kind of goes back to more of a stewardship model. That's one that I'm directly connected to and aware of. I'm wondering if anyone else has any other kind of points to discuss.
I think it's very interesting, just as a general topic, as it is also something which is a new topic coming up in the past years more and more. And I mean, in this conference, it's all about back and forth. There's always the blockchain and the background on that. And me, similar, and Asher also coming from the finance industry, and then seeing, okay, what can you finance? The difficulty is, what is my difficulty with these new economies overall is how do you differentiate between some serious actors, and how can you weed out all the, which is the majority, how can you weed out the bad stuff, right? Or the bad weed, or I don't know how that is in proper English. Now it is, if you look at it, it's the same drivers, which is the regenerative economy, generative real estate, sustainable industries, sustainable investments. Great big topics, but how can you get to the real gist of it, and how can you make sure that that is good? And that's something which is quite difficult on our side. We're doing we're supporting fundraisings for companies, and some of them are startups. Then they have already something going on, so there you can already judge it plus minus. But if there's the difficulty in early startups, which have more like an idea, and that was what got us into the big problems we had 3 and 2 years ago with the ICO bubble. That people were entrusting you the money with some kind of an idea, and that was humans unfortunately work the way that if they see that possibility, they're using it. And so much money just got given to some people who dared to ask for it, and with a shitty presentation which sounded somewhat in line with what was up to date, and that was what's going on. And I think that is really important, that that you ask yourself, whenever would you put money into an idea? Would you support a startup, a crowdfunding project, or whatever it is? How would you do it? Would you put in $50, or would you put in $1,000 or $5,000, or depending on how much money you've got? I think it is also always important to decide, hey, I only put in $100 or $50 if I would also put in 5,000 into it. Do I really trust this thing or not? Because otherwise, why should anybody waste their time? And that takes us back a little bit to the old school thinking. And I'm sorry, I'm not against crowdfunding. Crowdfunding got us to immensely great new things. Here in Switzerland, you can buy real estate co-proprietorship in an apartment. The apartment costs, you know, it's worth 500,000 or 1,000,000 Swiss francs, and you can buy for 1,000 francs, you can buy, you know, 0.1% in it, which is amazing. But, you know, this is what opened up, but you need to do your checks and everything. And I think that is very important that, you know, do your checks, you know, within these new things, you know, generative economy, do your checks, and you know, this is the only thing which helps the industry evolve, hopefully, up to a state that you can take it seriously a couple of years down the road.
I mean, just sorry, go ahead.
No, sure.
I was just going to say that I think it's important to have different sources. I mean, you're right. Like crowdfunding, obviously, Felix. You know, there's more risk, but I think it's still a good. I mean, I obviously, you know, don't invest in crowd sourced ideas, but I think it's a good and important medium because there's so many types of investors, right? Pools of capital. And I think crowdfunding does help certain types of sources. But you're right. Ultimately, it's about trust. I mean, investment is a trust-based, you know, system. So it is about learning enough about the people and building the trust. And unfortunately, I see too often people taking up the air and raising capital being the bad actors. But that is not because of the bad actors, it's because of the lack of sophistication of the investors. And you're absolutely right. If I'm going to give somebody $100, it might as well be $100,000. I should be because I could give that $100 to somebody in need in my personal network, as opposed to pissing it away and giving it to some asshole.
What?
Sorry, I interrupted somebody else there.
I think it was.
Oh no, I was just going to say fractional ownership seems to be a bit of a bridging. I mean, I think crowdfunding is different than fractional ownership and crowd investing. I think there's a distinct difference between those two. For me, crowdfunding is a little bit more just in a very sometimes unbaked idea and team, whereas crowd investing, there may be already a physical asset there that has some intrinsic value. And it seems that fractional ownership, although it hasn't completely taken off yet, there are definitely working examples in pretty much every country around the world. It's really depending on regulation. But it seems that this is a way towards more of the view of steward ownership. Because if 1,000 people have a stake in a piece of property or maybe a piece of common infrastructure, civil infrastructure, then its worth and its usage is very different. It's also potentially shaped by the people that have invested in that. So I think there is going to be a lot more opportunity in that space in the decade ahead, but I'm not sure what other kind of steward models are worth kind of exploring, or if anyone's aware of any other types of models that are out there at the moment.
So we invested in a couple of fractional ownership, you know, in terms of real estate and stuff. So yes, I think that's an interesting model, but I felt like the things that we invested in were because of a lack of access and because of the property prices, you know, real estate prices went up and regular people just couldn't afford. So it was almost like a symptom of inequality, increasing inequality. But I agree that, you know, there are certain use cases where fractional ownership makes a lot of sense. And absolutely these community, where community can come together and sort of manage property. So yes, that makes a lot of sense.
I think the community is really the important word there. And, you know, I think all the participants in this conference now, we are already a selection of people who are interested in these kind of topics. And this should be a motivation to people, to us, all of us, to get active there. Because it is a really long and difficult trail to get there. 3 years ago, we tried, no, yeah, it was three years ago, we got started with a project which is still ongoing in South Africa. There you've got the South Africa has the largest number of buildings created for people in need, right? This is how they get rid of you know, they don't have slums and stuff like that in South Africa. But the problem is that the people, once you need to get on a waiting list and so on. Once you get this house where you can live in, you don't, the transfer does not get, the land registration does not get transferred, so the deed is not yours. For that, you need to pay for it the traditional way, which is quite expensive. It's something like $3,000 or something, or equivalent of 3,000 US dollars. And to get that done already for these people who are getting this land, that is outside of their capabilities. Now we started something there, and there obviously it is the political, you know, so many politically exposed stakeholders which are there taking the decision, and that is really blocking it. Now, what we did in Switzerland is we were trying to get in contact with the government, and there we created a foundation, the Swiss Blockchain Federation, and that federation is a public and private partnership. So there we are working together with the financial regulator and the finance ministry. And, you know, of course, this is, you know, you need to first get there, then you initiate a discussion and so on, and then you can influence a little bit, at least, hopefully put to the positive side the regulatory setup, because in the end it goes through via the parliament. You know, it's not us influencing it, but we need to do this, and we need to show use cases. We need to, you know, present this to the people who are in the end then taking the decision. We need to create, even if small or ideally even big, good examples of it. That is the only way how we get ahead with this. So it should be a motivator for all of us.
Yeah, I agree. Vishal, would you like to maybe tell us a little bit about your rentless project? That's kind of interesting.
Sure, yeah, I'm at very early stages with it, but I'm very happy to tell you a little bit about it.
Maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself as well.
Yeah, I never know where to begin. I do a lot of different things. I have a huge background in technology as a software engineer. And then, you know, I discovered a whole life of regenerative sustainability, jungle homes, and a whole new like realm that I could never have imagined before. And that set me on a path of sustainability. And now I'm coming back to technology because it's going to weave the infrastructure that allows us to get to the real physical places that we want to really be at. So, yeah. And yeah, regarding rentless, you know, I was thinking everybody, you know, I pay rent right now, and right now I'm living in Tulum, Mexico. And ultimately, I'm a good human being, and I you know, I research really beautiful regenerative homes, you know, made with bamboo, made with other fibers, but they're stunning. They're like pieces of art, and you'd be like honored to live in them, you know. I should share some images, but yeah, and I realized that these things don't cost so much when you have the teams working with you. You know, when you hire an external architecture company, and I study bamboo architecture, it costs so much. But as soon as you have these people in-house, it's a lot cheaper. And I think we should focus our efforts on training our teams and reducing the cost to approximately $15,000 for a really beautiful house because we built it ourselves, you know, and cut all external costs because it's really not complicated. And ultimately, I want to allow people who, you know, to live within a specific collective, ideally digital nomads initially, and then eventually opening up to everybody. And they'll be able to pay rent there. But when they pay rent through this system, they're ultimately actually paying off. And I don't like to use the word mortgage. Apparently originates from, you know, mort, death, pledge, and that's really weird on its own. So yeah, but eventually paying off their home. And the way we do that is we pool the money together that usually you would get from a bank and end up paying in interest rates, probably a third of your home sometimes, you know, on top. And instead pooling that kind of money from the people. And they would thus earn a good interest rate too, you know? And this way people end up paying off their homes. Young people will have homes to live in. We paint a regenerative society. We empower locals, and I see it happening here already, so I can show you a documentary. But we empower like Mayans and the real people on the ground that want to work, that need money. And when they start working with these materials, they're smiling. Like when before, maybe they're skinny, they're a little unhealthy. And then, so there's this project called Bamboo Villages, and this is what they do. And then they make these guys the owner of the bamboo plantation. They teach them how to work there, and they have fun. They do it, and then they're healthy and they're happy. And anyway, I'm just trying to say, you know, it'll do a lot of good things to do things this way, because we're all living in like homes and we're all participating in infrastructure, and ultimately blockchain can, you know, help us weave things together. Anyway, that's my little blurb for now.
Interesting.
Yeah, the 1,000 Bamboo Villages project is actually really worth checking out. It's run by a guy out of Indonesia called Arif Rebek, whose mum was really heavily involved in bringing the bamboo industry to Indonesia. And their whole thing is, we'll go to a place, plant a bamboo forestation, which then creates the foundations for a village to be built. And then that village can then go out and pass that on to the next one and the next one. So it's certainly regenerative in nature. I'm not sure what their kind of quote unquote ownership and land ownership model is though at this point, but Arif's definitely worth reaching out to.
No, I studied with Arif, and yeah, I attend the World Bamboo Congress with him. He's a phenomenal human being.
Nice, he's a good man.
He's a rock star, and he's going to be bringing out a very special bamboo soon. It's called fiber something bamboo. It's phenomenal. You get like, you know, like wooden logs. You end up with something just like that, and it's totally just bamboo. It's science, and I freaking love it. It's just going to make it easier for construction and all passing regulations, and you know.
So I think the other interesting part of this whole space is the kind of software operating system for these communities as they evolve as well. I was listening to a conversation with a gentleman the other day, Ross Chapin, who pioneered the whole pocket neighborhood thing. And it's basically just a series of tiny homes together in a more of a village setup. And they've done really well, but what they found was that the decision making as a community that's when projects would fall over and fail, as opposed to just having the whole thing built out and then people would buy into that vision, or if it wasn't the right fit for them, they'd go somewhere else. I think the risk that a lot of these projects have, if they're growing from grassroots, is the kind of democratic decision-making process, which we know is not actually particularly effective. I've been much more interested in studying meritocracies recently. I'm wondering if anyone has any working examples of meritocracies working particularly well.
So if not, so Rory is going to be running the next session, and I guess I mean we've got a few minutes, so we can either continue or maybe we can give some extra few minutes to Rory.